Today, the Mentoring Triangle is joined by one of our professional mentors at London County, Hugh Leventon. Hugh, welcome.
Thank you.
And we'd just really like to take the opportunity today just to explore the whole sort of notion of mentoring, because we know you've been a very significant other in the lives of many people over many, many years, and also offers me the opportunity to thank you very much for lots of the mentoring support you've provided me down the years as well. And so really just be grateful if you share some of your ideas.
Well, it's very nice of you to say that I've been great support. It's been a great privilege to actually be working with you and helping you, because I think you're going somewhere with something that's really important, really powerful, and has a terrific message for everybody, not just for young people. Some of the things that cropped up recently for me is there was a really interesting article in the newspaper a few days ago, which was about children in education, particularly in private schools, and particularly towards the lower and upper sixth, and about the pressures that are put on them academically, sport, music, drama, doesn't matter what it is, but a lot of the private schools are really, really pushing their children very, very hard. And whilst a lot of schools have fantastic pastoral care through various teachers and maybe chaplains in schools and maybe through the master or whoever it might be, there was a need that had developed for children to have a really good mentor in the school where they could go and talk to somebody about what they were experiencing. And suddenly it had been shown up that perhaps that the schools hadn't recognised this. And it was a fantastic article, and as you know, I've got a 16-year-old who's in lower sixth, so it always brings back quite strong feelings for me about what they're going through. So this really resonated with me. Not that he would talk to me, but he would probably talk to a mentor in a way that would be a different conversation. He'll talk to me, of course he will, but you'll never really get, I don't think, to the bottom of it with your own kids, but somebody else definitely can help in a quite dramatic way. So I think the mentoring program is really important. So whether you're a top achieving violinist, a rugby player, or a tennis player, it doesn't really make any difference. They all have the same pressures on them. And the bar is set, I think, incredibly high in so many places, because they're all looking to measure their success by the results, which is a terrible way of measuring, the success of their kids. Maybe it's the best way as a generalisation, but in my view, I think you get much more out of children measuring them in a different way. And mentoring them actually is a fantastic thing, because if you can get them to communicate with you in a really positive and open manner, then they could probably encounter most things in life without too many worries.
You stir up a lot for me, Hugh. One thing, when you talked about top violinists, I know at the Hugh Leventon school, what they have is they have one person who focuses on performance in terms of violin playing, and then there's someone else who's completely detached from it, who simply focuses on them as a person, as a whole person. I guess that's
fantastic.
Something about what you're saying.
Yeah, that's terrific. I'm also have seen that in the Yehudi Menuhin school, and it's a wonderful, wonderful example. But I guess when you've got 1,200 kids going through a process where maybe, I don't know how many there are in the Yehudi school, but it's a select few that are invited to go through it. But the pressure's on them because they've been selected is even greater possibly than the ones that are not selected. So yeah, it's I think today as well, we're just constantly confronted by just tons of negativity in the media, whether it's in the newspapers or television or radio. The media always looking for a sensational story, and it's very rarely is it an optimistic story. It's nearly always a pessimistic story. It's always about trying to damn somebody for something they might have done 30 years ago unwittingly, but somebody's decided to take it upon themselves. It's now a good time to bring it up. And I just think kids pick up on that a lot. With an 8-year-old daughter, and I'm listening to the car radio and she's in the back, and she'll suddenly say, "What's that all about? What's this paedophilia thing about? What does that mean?" And suddenly you're confronted by an 8-year-old in your own car asking you about things which are in the news, which you're trying to safeguard them from until they're able to actually understand what that process is. And when they are able to understand it, to then help them through whatever that process means to them.
Were you talking about young people then and those pressures
Yes.
in media, and also the intensity of pressure on young people? Your example is private education. It could be sporting academies or
Yeah.
a whole range of places. I'm sort of inferring that you were suggesting that there's no place for them to go where they can be vulnerable. Now, that's not your words, that's mine. But
I understand.
is that partly the role of the mentor? Do you think that in a role that other people can't play, they can't be vulnerable to someone who might be making demanding judgments about them, but a mentor can fill that space for them? Do you think that's...
Yes, I think, kids feel vulnerable, but they don't like to show it.
Yeah.
They certainly don't like to talk about it. Especially boys. Maybe girls might feel a little different, but I haven't had an experience of 16-year-olds talking to me who've been female. But I think that schools like the sort of school my son goes to, there is a wonderful pastoral care. There is no doubt. He's in a house, a wonderful housemaster, great tutor. They have a great chaplain. But if you don't resonate with that particular person in your house, you're never going to trust yourself to be able to talk to them. And then, even if you do cross that threshold, there's still a big problem, because you're then talking to somebody who's actively engaged with your life. What you really need is somebody who's completely removed from it. So the chaplain in a school is probably a good person, but inevitably the chaplain is not always the most approachable person, because kids, whether they believe in God or whether they don't, is immaterial. He's in a place which is his classroom, the chaplain, and the kids sometimes find it difficult to go and walk into his classroom.
And he will be an authority figure.
Absolutely, and he'll have a duty of care to each child if they do talk to him, but he'll also have a duty to the school as well.
How is to allow someone who perhaps doesn't easily talk about themselves or confide or share, it's a hard question, this one, but how different is the conversation that you think you might have with someone when you're in mentoring mode compared with the conversation you might have, I don't know, when you're encouraging someone in the workplace? What's it special about a mentoring conversation?
I think the mentoring conversation is about possibly getting them to feel that you're as equally vulnerable, and being able to talk about yourself in a way that talks about the problems or the encounters you've had in your life.
Yeah.
So possibly as you're for an older person, they've had many more experiences because their road is longer and more winding than the 16-year-olds who are about to embark on a different road. But I think it's actually more about people feeling comfortable in your presence. So that I once said to Neil in a mentoring program, the very first one actually, there was a whole group of people around the table, some quite senior, some quite junior, and when I was asked to talk, I just said, there's one thing I'd like to ask everybody here, and I don't want you to just immediately give me an answer, is how many times in your day does somebody ask you, or do you ask them, how are you today? And who around the table here actually wants to listen to the answer, and who actually wants to ask the question in an honest way?
Mean it.
Yes. So I said that's the start of mentoring, is actually getting across that thing that I ask you how you are, and you look at me and you think, actually, I'd really like to tell this person I feel terrible today, but I don't think I can. Or I'm going to tell him because I think he's going to give me some really good advice, or I'm going to feel more comfortable about having said it. So it's really that to me.
That's a really important and clear and very personal, intimate way of describing the conversation. Thank you.
Yeah.
And one of the things I think is key is who that significant other is, and that's one of the reasons why we at London County has tried to develop young people to become mentors of even younger people, on the basis that I think the level of engagement with someone who's only a few years further down the road than you sometimes can be more significant than with a figure who is several decades on, or who could be perceived to be in a position of authority. But I think the key thing for me in terms of that exchange of information is you're unlikely to disclose some of your insecurities or vulnerabilities to someone who has a stake in the outcome. So if it's someone selecting something, or it's someone in terms of assessing your contract on anything, or whether or not to put you forward for a place on a particular program at school, no one really wants to compromise their chances of success there. But if you can offload that to someone who doesn't have a stake in the outcome, then once it's left your system, then you're more likely to be able to engage in whatever activity it is, or whether it's an interview or an exam or a performance, in a far better way, because through this sort of narrative therapy process, it's left your system, and that sort of obstacle, maybe internal obstacle that's blocking you, is, if it's been reduced, it's a good thing, but sometimes it can just be dissolved. So I think having people around who you can really relate to, I think is invaluable. But I think part of the challenge in the modern world is when figures of authority employ people to these roles, there's a danger that they could almost be spies, in that if they're not perceived to be on the side of a young person, and they're almost a plant.
So are you saying trust is terribly important then?
That is the key thing for me. And then sometimes it takes a long, long time to build.
How does Hugh do it?
Yeah, I was going
How
to
does
ask
Hugh
the same.
generate trust,
For
do
you,
you think?
I mean, for you,
What would you guess would be his secret?
Well, I'd be curious to learn from Hugh how he sees it, but before he does that, if I just share with you what you mean to me, is that you're honest, and I feel that you have my best interests at heart. So, therefore, I've always been able to talk about some of the difficulties that I may be going through, because my sense is that you're not judging me. Is that I'm just providing you with some data as to how I can maybe sift through some of these difficulties. But fundamentally, it's that I believe that you wish me well.
Well, that's terrific that you think that. No, I'm delighted you said that, actually, because I'm not here in this world to judge anybody, and I've never wanted to judge anybody or have anything to do with that. And there are times in my life when I've been seriously challenged by the denial I've been in about my life, and as a result of that, it's helped me through some very, very difficult stages, of which only now probably do I feel comfortable that I'm glad I took that first step sort of 40 years ago. But it took me a long time to take the first step. So trust is a really, really important part of all of that. But then it's actually finding people who you can relate to, who are not going to judge you. If you want to talk to somebody because you want to offload, unburden yourself, you really want somebody to listen to you. And I was talking to Richard earlier on, and it made him laugh. I said, we haven't seen each other for a little while, and we were talking about talking and listening, and I said, there are only two types of people in this world. And he looked at me. I said, yeah, there are those people who are waiting to listen and those people waiting to talk. So he laughed and said, you're so right. And he said, I find that so hard. He said, sometimes I really want to talk when I should be listening, and sometimes I do talk and not listen. I said, we all do the same. I said, because you get sometimes a little bit frustrated by trying to help somebody who hasn't quite grasped where they are today, even though they've talked about it in a really open and honest discussion. They still haven't quite grasped where they are, what they need to really begin to explore. So I think trust is a key thing, and I think if you are open and you are truly intimate in the relationships you can have with people, then people will naturally trust you. I think you look into somebody's eyes and you know fairly quickly whether you can trust them or not. And those people that you can't trust, you immediately bring down the shutters. It doesn't matter who you are, it just happens. I mean, as you know, I do a lot of work in Formula One, and Mr. Eccleston has been somebody I've worked with for a long time. and you get 15 seconds with him to convince him of what you're talking about before the shutters come down. So that's a very good place of work to understand how you need to engage immediately. And particularly if you want to help somebody, you need to really engage with them straight away, and not let them be having to talk about themselves. Talk about you, so that then they find that really interesting, because sometimes you'll just touch a nerve of theirs and say, oh, that resonates with me. Gosh, that's what happened with me and my dad, or whatever it might be. And suddenly then you're away, and then they really do engage.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today.
It's been a pleasure. It's interesting that you're doing this, because I think it's a great opportunity. I think it's a fantastic way of actually getting the message out. Because, it's the hardest thing in the world is to convey to a person or groups of people the benefit of mentoring. It couldn't be harder. And yet, if you get a group together like you do, you get some senior people and some junior people together, and they can have the benefit of being in one another's audience for a few hours, you can certainly see things really come to life, and it's fantastic, and I think people can draw a fantastic amount of inspiration from it.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.